May is the month for mermaids, so me and Myrtle decided that we would go outside and celebrate, but it was very sunny, which is not good for her aquatic complexion. So instead, we decided to make our own little mermaid grotto. Myrtle was very pleased with how it all came together. Skilla also decided to join us. Every May, I celebrate the unofficial holiday Mer-May and make mermaid-themed crafts and mermaid-themed paintings, and I thought it would be fun for Myrtle to celebrate with us. She was very excited. This large shell that she was playing with gave us both a really fun idea. I was really inspired by some of these seashell crafted watercolor palettes that I'd found on Pinterest, and I wanted to try making one of my own, but having it contained in this one large shell. All you'll need for this project is some seashells and some air-dried clay. I spent a lot of my time doing this, just fiddling around with the positioning of the shells. I wanted it to sit nicely and have a place for both mixing and color. Putting this together felt a little bit like solving a puzzle. There were so many different combinations, and I wanted it to also look really aesthetically pleasing, so I took my time putting it together. I used the little snail sort of shells as the paint pots, and these larger flat shells as little mixing trays. I feel like the project really started coming together when I had the idea of stacking them vertically. I ended up having a lot of leftover shells and clay, and I didn't really want it just sitting in my art drawers, so I decided to use this dish to make a second palette. I just got some of the clay and pressed it into the bottom and laid the shells on top. So this one was much more simple to make, but I think it turned out nicely. The next step is to add the actual watercolor paints to our palettes, which luckily I have a rather large selection of. Because I want some of these shells to remain empty in order to use them as mixing trays, I decided to go with a very limited color palette themed after water. The colors I used were Payne's Gray, Cobalt Blue, Magnesium Green, Yellow Green, Lemon Yellow, and Alizarin Orange. These are all colors that I tend to gravitate to when I'm painting things that are watery. My advice when painting water is not to limit yourself just to shades of blue. I found that the moment it comes alive is when I add these bright lemony greens and yellows. Having the surroundings be accented with this orange will really set off the colors even more. Phase 1 of our project is complete, and it's time for the reveal. Putting these together was really enjoyable. It's been a little while since I did a more simple craft. I was able to complete this in one sitting, and I would really advise it if you're having a party this summer or just wanting to hang out with some friends as a fun activity. Now that we have our palette set up, I thought it would be fun to do some tests on our watercolors. I've recently begun assembling a process book for my watercolors to help me remember the different steps and techniques I do to get certain effects. I have a couple go-tos that I usually rely on, but I thought it would be nice to be a little more experimental and try some new things that I haven't tried before, and I wanted to share those results with you so that you can learn what worked and what didn't work from this project. If you have experimented much with watercolor, you've probably heard of using salt to get some different textures, and so I wanted to test that out in two different ways. For the first square, I just used some regular table salt. I first applied a layer of watercolor paint, and then before it had dried, I sprinkled the salt over the top of it. For the second one, I decided to use some pink Himalayan salt that I had in this tiny jar on my desk, and see if that had a different effect than the regular table salt did. You'll need to let the watercolor paint and the salt completely dry, and this might take a while, so we'll come back to this step later. The next technique is my absolute favorite one. I use it whenever I can, and it is rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle. After you've applied some of the watercolor paint, just a little spritz or two, and it creates this really delicate texture. One note on using this, you don't want there to be pools of watercolor paint, or else you will lose some of the texture. Next, I wanted to experiment with using a paper napkin to soak up and remove some of the wet watercolor paint. And I was really surprised with how much I liked this texture. I don't use this very frequently, but I think I would like to. Now that this spread has been completed, I'll set it aside to dry, and we can start on the crazy stuff. Here's some rubber cement. And I thought I might try using it like masking fluid. I've never used masking fluid before. I really should go and get some, but I don't know. I thought I'd try this, so we'll see what happens. I was also curious what would happen if I put it over this high gloss Mod Podge, so I applied that and then let those two sit to dry. This next one, I'll be using a straw to blow the water across the page and see how well I can control this. And ooh, I love it already. Oh, it has such life, such energy. I'll be using this in everything. I can't wait to draw some leaves and some fairies. Ah! Because oil and water naturally repel each other, I was curious what would happen if I applied the watercolor paint to a base of oiled paper. And look at that. I wasn't expecting it at all, but I love this. I think this would be so beautiful to try. I was also wanted to try dropping some oil into the paint, and it turned out really beautiful. I like it. Now that the rubber cement and the Mod Podge have dried, I applied some watercolor over the top of them to see if it would soak through and just what it would look like. I was really interested by how these came out. I think that it would be hard to control on a small scale, but for a backdrop or a sky or some magical stuff, it would be really interesting. Since I loved using the rubbing alcohol so much in a spray bottle, I wanted to try just dropping it into the paint, and look at that. My sister saw me doing this, and she recommended that I use some sugar and see if that had an effect similar or different to the salt, so I gave that a try. I also wanted to see what this cornstarch would do if I added it to the paint, so I sprinkled some of that on top. By now, it was time to gently rub the salt off of the paper. You can see that the table salt definitely had an effect. Unfortunately, the pink salt didn't really seem to do very much except for a little on her tail. I wanted to give some final thoughts on the results of all of my different tests, starting with the first spread over here. I do like how the table salt came out. It's a very delicate sort of texture, and I think the pink salt would work, but I think mine was too old. It was ancient. Of course, I loved the rubbing alcohol spray. And I would love to try making some frost with the paper napkin. As for the rubber cement, I did rub off the gooey part after it had dried. This caused some of the dried paint to smear, but I do think this technique would still be useful for something more abstract or in a backdrop. Once I had scraped off all of the cornstarch powder, I really enjoyed what was left behind, and I look forward to using this one as well. The sugar did have an effect. I think it was more drastic than even the salt, but it did cause it to be a little sticky and attract some flies, so I'm not sure if I will be using this one. I had so much fun in the test for this that I decided to do it again with this mermaid. Moving on to the next spread, we'll take a look at the oil experiments. There are some pros and cons to this one. I do like the texture, but it's hard to control, so I would use it for a background. Alcohol drops looked so interesting, and I'd love to try using them to make scales or eyes. The Mod Podge is another mixed review because I like the texture and that it has this raised surface, but you can't move it once it's been put down, so it would have to be used very carefully. And with that, our experiment is complete. Time to go put these new techniques into practice. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly hope that these activities help you in your own watercolor journey and give you some fun craft ideas for the summer. Whether the Mer-May weather is rainy or sunny where you are, I hope that you use this month to really let your creativity flow and make something beautiful. The world is full of many good things, and I hope that they all find you today. I'll see you next time.